the first 12 pages, essentially the first section of this document, which is a very lengthy and very detailed document and a very technical document, which is what is expected from a communist party. And I will just go through that first section of it, and then hopefully that will be quite sufficient to take us down to about an hour and a half with discussions as well. So I'm just going to, I've written a little bit of a piece, which is about 3 pages long. It might take around about 20 to 25 minutes, I don't know. But anyway, the, I will start from, that the Chinese 1949 revolution resulted in the overthrow of the bourgeoisie and feudalism. And it went on to transfer the state power of the working class it went on to actually, establish the state power of the working class and establish the dictatorship of the proletariat. This was followed up by an intensive drive for the construction of the socialist society. To realize the policy of self-reliance, initiatives like the Great Leap Forwards were undertaken. These campaigns were designed to educate the masses in class as well as enable them self-sufficient in their daily material needs. Mao insisted that private ownership of the means of production must end, and productive forces must be in the command of the working class. And only then the mode of production can be changed to a socialist mode. Agriculture and industry were brought under the control of the proletariats. Collectives were established in farming sector. Workers' cooperatives were established in industry. Feeding the people was the first priority of the agricultural sector. The peasants were mobilized to expand the arable land by creating terraced farming and extending irrigation systems, blocking drought areas from excessive rainfalls, and things like that. Huge projects like that were undertaken. Virtually all of the rural population was engaged in the commune systems. Landowning peasants were encouraged to combine their land with the collective farms, which became attractive because farming tools and machines could be shared. Despite droughts and flooding that led to severe famine in the 50s, within a few years, China became self-sufficient in food. Industry was told to produce commodities that were of use to the people. Items that were of high value, items that were of a high use value, like plows, tractors, and farming tools were given top priorities. Items which had low use values, but in the capitalist term, very high sale values. For example, a watch might fetch a very good price in the market, but it was actually a very low use value to the socialist program. So commodities of that nature were discouraged, and commodities that were used to the socialist program were encouraged. Industry was motivated to serve the objective of feeding the people. And new improved agricultural machines were manufactured to produce increased farm produce. Academic technical institutes in the coastal areas were encouraged to develop technical centers in the rural areas and serve the people by listening to their needs. Indigenous industry was thus developed without any outside help. Work was guaranteed to all. All children were given free education, free lifelong health care, and care in retirement was guaranteed, as well as sick and elderly were guaranteed to be taken care of. Throughout the early period of the socialist construction, the capitalist roaders were always present. The likes of Liu Shaoqi, Deng Xiaoping argued that China was predominantly a feudal society. Bourgeoisie had not sufficiently developed in the Marxist terms. Therefore, its antithesis, the proletarians, with its own consciousness had not actually developed. To establish a socialist society, they argued, it was not yet possible, and that the bourgeoisie had to be supported and developed to change the mode of production from feudalism to capitalism. The capitalist road is claimed only when the proletariat level of consciousness is sufficiently developed, can a dictatorship of the proletariat be established. This thinking was totally against Mao's revolutionary thought, who put forward the concept of new democratic revolution. The new democratic revolution essentially was a program which saw the revolutionary potential in the peasantry. The peasantry had bourgeois tendencies. At the same time, it could be an ally of the working class in a united front against the bourgeoisie and the feudal forces. Mao's new democratic revolution proposed such an alliance, but with the proviso that the proletariat must firmly be in the lead. Through implementation of the new democratic revolution, the socialist construction was carried out with huge successes. The determined capitalist roaders, with their own class interests, though defeated many times, never relented and always presented obstacles at every opportunity. Benefiting from the economic gains of the socialist construction, and the capitalist roaders often became boisterous and threatened the dictatorship of the proletariat. The capitalist roaders always encouraged incentivization and private properties in farming and and working outside the system. Mao launched the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution to further educate the masses about the importance of class struggle, maintaining the proletarian state control, and keep the capitalist roaders in check. After the death of Mao in 1976, the sleeping capitalist roaders came to the fore and started dismantling the socialist construction. In the interest of production efficiency, millions of workers were laid off, creating biggest unemployment in history, in Chinese history, perhaps in human history. Collective farming was abandoned, land was privatized, small landowners were unable to yield profitable crops because benefits offered by the collectives were no longer available to them, such as subsidized fertilizers and the cheap loan of farm machinery, because they were all withdrawn. Millions of peasants lost their livelihoods. Abandoned workers and peasants lost free education, healthcare, and, and the rest. People were forced to abandon the countryside and migrate to the coastal cities for work, to survive, and support folks back at home. Trade unions were rendered ineffective because trade unions were very rife during, during the socialist constructive period. Workers' wages were slashed, private enterprises grew, monopolies emerged. Through the period of socialist construction, China had developed highly educated, skilled, and disciplined workforce. Foreign investors whose indigenous workers were unionized had negotiated good wages and working conditions came to the scene in China. Here I'm talking about the Western world where the workers were unionized. They had for decades consolidated good pays or better pays and working conditions. And these the foreign investors in the Western world saw that as an impediment, and so China to be the place to go where they could get cheap labor and organized force. The capitalist rulers took over the control of the Communist Party of China. Dictatorship of the proletariat was replaced by the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. Socialism here, I would say, did not fail, but it was defeated. The revisionist China after the restoration of capitalism. After the death of Mao in 76, the revisionist Deng Gang formulated a counter-revolution. They waved the flag with the purpose of bringing the red flag down. They waited for the opportunity to resume the politics of Liu Shaoqi and Lin Biao, i.e. the restoration of capitalism, which the great proletarian cultural revolution had fought against from 1966 to 1976. The revisionists blamed the misfortunes of China on the Cultural Revolution, which they labeled as ultra-left errors. The capitalist eroders resorted to defaming Mao and witch hunting his followers. Counter-revolutionary reforms were launched with calls for political stability, discipline, economic growth, incentives, skill, foreign technology, and investment. Bourgeoisie was given control over all relations of production. In stark contrast to the socialist planning, economic planning was now to be done according to the market forces and market regulations. Unhealthy competition and conflict among private producers led to rise of small, rich sections, whilst majority of the people started to become poor. Labor was reverted back to becoming a commodity, thus changed the previous practice of all workers having more or less the same labor value, irrespective of job function. Both means of production and labor power were put on the market, which could be bought and sold. The objective of these reforms was not to, the objective of Deng Xiaoping's reforms was not to develop socialism, but capitalism with Chinese characteristics. Economic reforms were carried out in two phases. The first generation consolidated economic phase was between 1978 to 1989. Agriculture reforms began in 79. Urban reforms began in 1984. Urban reforms, these brought in the open door policy of foreign capital. China joined the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank in 1980. Thus, the revisionists became partners in the world capitalist imperialist system. Independent capital saw huge rise of private enterprises and massive layoffs. The reforms gave way to exploitation and accumulation of capital in few hands. Multinational corporations were given unrestricted access. In 1982, there were 26 million private companies, which became 58 million a year later in 1983. World Bank gave 220 million US dollars and 20-year loans for various projects to the central government. Monopolists of coastal cities were allowed to set up special economic zones in which private companies had little or no restrictions. So these special economic zones, very much like what is happening in the so-called free world, you set up special economic zones where the government has no control or has no jurisdictions in terms of labor laws or anything like that. The companies that set up these special economic zones, they have a free hand to run the business the way they want. They are actually enclaves within countries. State-planned economic policies ceased to exist. Only profit through market economy mattered. State finance and planning only concerned with facilitating new bourgeoisie dictatorship. Agricultural reforms, the revisionists always wanted to break up the commune system. Now they had that opportunity. Collective management of land, agriculture, tools, and animals were banned. Contract systems were introduced. Communal land was slowly transformed into private property. Dismantling of the communes meant the loss of public industry, trade, mining, education, health, child and elderly welfare, and entertainment, and all the other good things that collectives provided under the state control. Cooperatives were liquidated. State would only buy from private contractors. Surplus produce could be sold on the open market, which gave rise to private traders of food grain. Price of farm produce was increased by 20% to introduce incentives to privatization of farm produce. Big landholders flourished while middle and small landholders suffered due to loss of shared farm tools and machinery and farm subsidies. Hundreds of thousands of farmers were left homeless. 150 million became free laborers, i.e. out of work. Restoration of capitalism gave rise to property, unemployment, corruption, smuggling, prostitution, female infanticide, drug trafficking, etc. The first generation reforms saw extensive rise of private companies and joint ventures between state and foreign capital. There emerged the autocratic state capitalist class and private capitalist class. The autocratic state capitalists with positions in the Communist Party and the government institutions had an easy access to acquisition of land and means of production. Private capitalist was not part of that government, had no political power, and felt seriously disadvantaged. They raised slogans for bourgeois democracy and clearer legal rights to private property. The agitations at one stage culminated into the Tiananmen Square incident, which was brutally suppressed. The Deng revisionist clique had learned lessons from the revisionism in USSR. In USSR, the private capitalist class found its way into the government and were able to implement American-style imperialist bourgeoisie. That led to the disintegration of USSR. The Chinese revisionists were not going to let that happen and see the breakup of China to establish autocratic control of monopoly capitalism. I'm coming out another 2 minutes, I think I will be finishing. And this is to do with the second generation reforms, which followed in 1990. The special economic zones were introduced more widely, whilst the special economic zones provided the capitalist free hand to exploit the labor force and maximize profits. The influence outside the zone, their influence outside the zone was restricted. Whereas the first generation reforms allowed privatization of small to middle enterprises. The second generation reforms allowed foreign direct investment in large enterprises. Foreign multinational corporations were invited into joint ventures with the state monopoly capital. Able to offer educated, skilled, disciplined labor with good infrastructure, the multinational corporations were lured by the potential of big profits. China, on the other hand, was able to make very hard bargains with the multinational corporations and stood to benefit from the ready-made markets for their manufactured goods in the outside world. Foreign direct investment in 92 equaled $1 billion US, whereas in 94, it became $50 billion. This paved the way to convert most of the state enterprises into profit-oriented corporatization system. Between 1998 and 2002, 25 million workers were terminated from the public sector. Lifetime unemployment became contract work. World Trade Organization congratulated the Chinese bourgeoisie on their profit rates and worker productivity. That is all I want to cover today. I think it is useful to understand the reversal of the dictatorship of the proletariat into the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie, and how state monopoly capitalism came into being. This might help us to better understand how the next higher stage, that of social imperialism, how we can interpret that. Most of my notes above are taken, I should mention, is taken from Pao Yu Ching. She wrote a book, Victory to Defeat, China's Socialist Road and Capitalist Reversal. This book is available in PDF form on the internet and is also available in audio. I recommend that you read that. I hope this will inspire some discussion today. Thank you.
There was a question, I did ask it, Tom. This is Ravi here, but I think Lekker's kind of, as he went through his present and his recalled how China has gone through the different stages and it's done a full cycle back to capitalism. And I'm glad he mentioned that socialism was defeated, it didn't fail. But my initial question was about how land reform was conducted in China in the initial stages and some of the necessary steps that were taken. But it appears from Lek's very informative presentation that China is fully emerged and a part of the global economic world order, and it's obviously played its economic maneuverings well for kind of the creamy elites at the moment. But yeah, I think he's answered my question in that sense in terms of what happened and what's happened to the workers since, and to some of the large unemployment that's been created. My question to Lek is, what do you see happening for China in the future? I mean, obviously China's investing heavily across the world in parts of the developing world. Maybe that's something Lek can maybe answer in terms of the future for China. Where do you see it heading in terms of its role as a global leader?
A very quick answer to that, Ravi, is that I think as we go through the document, it will become very clear as to what the trajectory is, because if you go along with Leninism, that capitalism is, imperialism is the highest stage of capitalism. And now China has become a imperialist. And according to Leninist thought, the only alternative is for the proletarian to rise. And I don't think there is any other, my other comrades will probably correct me, that from imperialism, you can only see the rise of the working people, the proletariat, towards a revolution, socialist revolution. I think it's although we get very little information out of China apparently, but there is an underground. There is quite a lot of discontent, and there are people struggling to fight the environmental issue, to fight the labor issues, and there is a lot of struggle going on. So although we don't get to hear about it, but the proletarians are on the rise, and this is an ongoing class struggle issue.
Do you really find that it was the individuals who were close to Mao who changed tack?
Well, that's standard.
Louder. Can you be a little louder?
Can I ask him if we accept that?
It doesn't have his answers.
You see, you are. Put your hand out.
Hi, thank you, Lek, for that summary of that long document. I suppose for me, one of the important questions is, to what extent is China different from other global northern imperialist powers? To what extent has China retained some of its socialist origins, 49 onwards? Is there a difference between the United States and China in terms of everyday life, society, and experiences? what is the difference between China today, Western imperialist countries, and those? I tried to draw a comparison to Cuba, which has also undergone a market economy
Now,
revisionism
recently.
in the recent past, but
Recently.
I'd rather be living in Cuba. If I was a young man, I'd go and live in Cuba. So to what extent do we still find some elements of socialism in China, which is absent elsewhere?
Can I add something to that?
No.
Oh,
That's my
the
question.
role of the army. The army own lots of
Yes, I know of
industries.
that. I mean, it's an open question to other people, but I'm not. It's not just a question to Lek. Yeah.
I mean, when you look at the actual character of the society now, as we see it, it is actually a socialist society that has been defeated, and restoration bourgeoisie has succeeded, and it has now actually gone further into becoming an imperialist power. Imperialist power with a slightly different approach, but nonetheless it is imperialist. So I'm not too, I don't really get head up about distinguishing between American imperialism against the Chinese imperialism, because at the end of the day, imperialism is about exploiting and extracting the maximum amount of exploitation from the companies that you exercise power over. Whether whether it is done whether it's done through social imperialism or your normal regular imperialism, at the end of the day, it is exploitation of the working people to its maximum. So I don't really see the difference in the, although it gives a really big food for argument for postmodernists. I suppose you can say that, oh, you don't want to become, you don't want to go explore the road of socialism because look what's happened there. It gives them a huge amount of fodder to regurgitate against us, against socialism. But in the other, to me, sorry, I think imperialism is imperialism, and no matter what form of imperialism it is. Short answer.
Yeah.
Okay, Philippa.
Okay. Lex, following on from what you've just said, how similar do you think China and India are?
In what sense?
Well, you're using the word imperialism for China or just become a capitalist state. So given its history, is it now the same as India, do you think? In the same level of, in terms of the same level of development and the same level of social structure and whatever?
No, I think India is way behind in terms of being the same level of power as China. India might think it is the up and coming power, but it is nowhere near on the scale of China and the US and the United States.
You mean
international? India does exercise imperialist tendencies and does exercise imperialist maneuvers with its neighbors. You can see Sri Lanka, Nepal, and Bhutan, and and perhaps the neighboring countries, it would like to be as powerful as China, but it is nowhere near as that. So I don't think we can be actually making a comparison.
Okay, can I just add to that? In your account, my understanding about China is that the military own and run a great deal of the wealth and the infrastructure industries in China, but it didn't come up in what you would in your account. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah.
And so in that way, the government itself influences capitalists by running these.
Yeah, I brushed with that point by just saying that the people who mostly benefited from the capitalist restoration were people in the government, in the Communist Party, and and you can say in the army as well, because they had easy access to obtaining land and the means of production than anybody else. And in fact, the army, the People's Liberation Army, is perhaps the biggest monopoly owner in whole of China.
Right, yeah. So that's a slightly different, that would definitely be a difference between Western capitalist countries, wouldn't it? Because they're, as an institution, they manage those sectors.
It certainly is true that, I mean, in the Western world, I mean, I would invite other people to say their bit, but it appears that in the Western world that you don't, the institutions like the army and the police force don't meddle in the economic systems to the same extent as in China. So there is that difference. But in terms of the working class analysis, I'm not too sure whether there is any difference, because the workers get shafted wherever you live.
Mm-hmm. Thanks.
Yeah, so again, just picking up this point about, our last couple of sessions we talked about, we tried to describe state monopoly capitalism. And what's interesting about China is that, I mean, even today, around 40%, 40% of industry is actually owned by the state. What do I mean by that? Well, as we've just been discussing, different state organs like the Chinese army, the People's Army, through their positions of power and authority, run businesses under some sort of state monopoly control. So almost half the economy is still owned notionally by the state. Although, of course, ownership there means that people in positions of power within those organs benefit the most. And they, of course, exploit workers like any other owners or managers of capital. And something like, I think it's something like 35% of Chinese economy is privately run. So that the private sector is run by individuals, either foreign or Chinese peoples, run private businesses, whether it's an agricultural industry or retail or whatever, or service industries. And the remaining part of the economy, perhaps another third, are so-called joint public-private enterprises between the state and other investors, so between multinational corporations and the Chinese government. They run joint stock companies. So the economy is a kind of a very mixed picture of private ownership and state-controlled ownership. The point being, of course, is that state control is an umbrella term to describe the management and ownership and benefits of productivity going to an elite, the so-called new class. So in Soviet Union, theoreticians talked about the emergence of a new class of people who, by virtue of their positions of power, their political power gave them access to resources. A new class of powerful people, bureaucrats in the Soviet Union, it's called the nomenklatura, the individuals who ran the bureaucracy. So as in China, the emergence of a very powerful bureaucracy under the organs of the Chinese Communist Party ran the state, and they had become the beneficiaries of state businesses. So they're quasi-private beneficiaries under the umbrella of state control. So this is why I was trying to suggest the difference between the Chinese model of capitalism and Western models, where the fusion between state and private capitalism is less clear cut. And that is my point initially.
I just want to say that I have only covered the first sort of 12 pages of the documents, and those questions may well be answered as we go along. But I would like to say that even within the state capitalism, there are individuals within the government who are big shareholders in their own right, and there are, within the Communist Party and the generals within the People's Liberation Army, they are huge. They hold huge amounts of shares in the state stroke private enterprises. So it's a bit of a moot point whether it is actually state or whether it is actually capitalist economy, monopoly economy. So I would like to learn more about it myself, to be honest.
Okay.
So where do you get that information about this ownership? Where did you get that data?
If you, I sent around an article a couple of weeks ago, which explored those connections. So,
well, I can. Sorry, that I really do. I mean, I will send this this summary I have done. I will send it to you, share it with you. But at the bottom of it, I have referenced Pao Yu Jing's document, and it's a fantastic. To me, it's very easy read. It's actually available in audio as well. And I've been going out on walks and listening to it, and a lot of this information is in that book. And this is Victory to Defeat China's Socialist Road and Capitalist Reversal.
Okay.
It is truly an amazing. That actually only talks about socialist construction and capitalist reversal, whereas the document in question here is actually talking about social imperialism and what the Chinese imperialist designs are in terms of world domination, because that's what imperialism is about world domination.
Okay, James.
Yeah, I'm more interested in the first part of this document, which it doesn't go into tremendous amount of detail, probably because they want to concentrate more on the situation now. But the actual restoration of capitalism, particularly for the Indian party, the important part of looking at the Chinese situation is the new democratic revolution, because that's the stage or a similar kind of stage that India would be in if it had a strong revolutionary movement. The article appears to just accept point blank that everything that happened in the period up until where it says socialism was established was progressive and effective. So, for instance, the Great Leap Forward and the Great Proletarian Cultural Revolution, everything about those is accepted as being good, and as a result, the situation of what it calls establishment of socialism after that period of time is accepted. But I don't think that there's sufficient analysis of that. It's very difficult, I think, to find all the information because most of the information about those things that we get in the West is coming from anti-Chinese bourgeois sources. But it seems to me that the whole process of turning a feudal, semi-feudal, semi-colonial country like China to one where you have dictatorship of the proletariat is a very complicated issue, which is Mao understood that in terms of talking about the new democratic revolution, the alliance between the peasantry and the proletariat being extremely small, obviously, at the time. And the struggle was continuing, but it wasn't a straightforward struggle by any means. I think we would have to accept that there were many mistakes made in the Great Leap Forward, and that the Cultural Revolution was an extremely complicated thing. I don't think you can just take one side and say, that was the correct side, and when it was overthrown by the capitalist roaders, that was all bad. I think to understand how the capitalist roaders came to power, you have to have more knowledge about that process, the backwards and forwards process of the new democratic revolution of the first period of time up until perhaps the end of the Cultural Revolution.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to know.
I agree with you, James. I think the book I have just mentioned, that actually goes into that in much more details than the document we are discussing, and it is true that the construction of the socialist society, Mao and the Communist Party faced a huge amount of problems, because at the end of the day, you were trying to establish a new form of society, and socialism is only a few decades old, and they don't have the experience, and there are going to have to be mistakes made, and learning and relearning have to be done. I thought, the beauty about Mao's period was that the decision making was given to the ground level. It was the cadres who run the communes, and it was the collectives. It was the collectives, workers' cooperatives that ran the factories and the foundries. They weren't imposed from the above, how to run their daily life, and how, they were given targets. You got to be self-sufficient. They were given that, you got to educate and feed your people. So, and how they did that, there were tremendous challenges they had. and all at the time when the whole of the rest of the world had boycotted them. Even the Soviet Union, after the fall of Stalin, had pulled the carpet from under their feet. So the experiences the Chinese people went through with their ups and downs, and you know, I think they all admitted that Great Leap Forward could have been done better, or you know, and they learned from it. And at the end of the day, despite all the people, I say 6 million lost their lives in the famines and the droughts. Then Deng Xiaoping, when he came into power, he says it was not 6 million, it was 40 million. And then now those figures are now being even more inflated to 120 million. So what I get sense that these figures are designed against the socialist construction, to paint a picture what a disastrous road Mao took the people to, when in fact, you know, I think the achievements of the Chinese people, everyone became literate for it. I mean, there was only 15 to 20% literacy before the 1949, and all of a sudden, you know, with everybody getting schooling, education, things like that, people became literate. You know, the fact that the Chinese technology now, or well, not now, but you know, was all self-reliant. Nobody taught them the technology. They developed their own weaponry systems, their own technology. And okay, you know, they opened up to the Western world with their open policies to the WTO, International Monetary Fund. Did they actually negotiate you know, technical rights and things like that? But that was all on the strength of Chinese working class having been developed into a very educated, skilled, fully fed working people. That is an achievement, you know. No doubt there were disasters on the way.
Can I just pick up? No, sorry. Can I just pick up a point which James introduced, which is the difficulty of trying to get hard information about China. So, for example, the Chinese Communist Party recently, a few months ago, announced that the last province in China had been lifted out of poverty using the United Nations definition of poverty, claiming that for the first time in its history, China was poverty-free according to that definition. I've tried very hard to establish some facts about this in terms of, because one also hears about great disparities between rural China and urban China in terms of health and education and that sort of thing. So there's a question mark about establishing the facts of the matter, but a claim is made that it's 1.4 billion people, which is about a quarter of the world's population, is poverty-free, which would be an amazing achievement in the past 50 years.
Their standards.
And the kind of the second point about facticity, which I struggle with, is, for example, the debate about the alleged genocide of the Uyghur Muslims or not. It's very hard to establish what's going on, because quite clearly a lot of the critique of Chinese government is orchestrated by America and certainly by very, very anti-socialist Chinese expats who live in America. So it's very hard to establish the truth about these major issues. It's a bit like North Korea and what's actually going on. You know, it's hard to find out.
Okay.
But if indeed poverty has been eliminated in China
On that definition.
by the United Nations definition of what, $5 a day, then it's a truly an amazing achievement.
Yeah. Yes, Kalpana.
Yes, thank you, Lake, for actually sending that whole program and document. I read the whole thing. I just got going, and it's quite heavy on statistics and things, I think, and it's quite difficult to understand that. So I'm glad you concentrated on the first sort of historical bit. And in some ways, I think my politicization happened in that period. It was quite inspiring to read about cultural revolution, through the filters, but it was quite inspiring to see that they weren't only tackling the economic things, but also the ideological things and ideas, and students, everybody had a chance to say things and then collectively change things. So that was quite a different way of organizing compared to the hierarchical things that most of us, I was brought up with. And so that bit was inspiring. Also, I mean, my background was comparing India with China. Both countries became independent about the same time. And it did seem that they'd both taken a alternative view ahead, road ahead. And China seemed to have been doing tremendously better in providing, as you said, healthcare, education to masses of people and trying to reduce the difference between the cities and the agricultural provinces. So all that, I would say, that was all positive. But talking about this particular document, sort of, in a way, I'm sort of thinking aloud a little bit, but Animal Farm comes to mind, the novel Animal Farm. So there were already criticisms of what's going to happen and the whole question about so-called dictatorship of proletariat that's been proposed. I mean, is it truly possible to do that? Was in China, was there, even though there was a socialist change, was there really a dictatorship of proletariat? Or was it still going through two-line struggles or three-line struggles that they talked about, the capitalist roaders, the ultra-left lines and things. And Mao was talking about all these different trends and struggles will go on within the party because party had the control of the state organism. So those sort of things were already being talked about. So to me, by just saying, oh, the capitalist roaders sees that thing, I still don't understand why. I mean, is that because there's a weakness? You said socialist ideas weren't defeated. Oh, socialist ideas weren't, I think you used the phrase, they weren't defeated, they whatever lost. Well, why did that happen? I mean, why should that have happened? If sorry, hold on. And then one last thing, so you can answer all these. And then comparing that with what happened in Soviet Union. I mean, Soviet Union started with the same, history, if you like, initially collectivization, changing from feudal to more advanced capitalist. So is there a theoretical weakness in all this? Sorry, I'm going to say in a negative way, but.
No, these are very important questions, and we need to be debating these in order to understand, have an understanding. China comparing with India. I have had the fortune of visiting China twice on business trips, and I see China.
Sorry, I'm having a problem again with our connection. So you're breaking up. Sorry, can you repeat that?
I have had the fortune of visiting China on business trips twice in my career, and I have seen, you know, the inlands of China and the coastals of China, and when you compare the cities and the rail links and the road connections, when you compare with the bestest of India, you know, it's like it's worlds difference. It's a world's difference, you know, and so, you know, both China and India became so-called, well, independent at the same time. But the progress made by the Chinese people, is absolutely amazing. And I was totally gobsmacked. And I often asked the question from my Chinese counterparts over there, you know, how much unemployment do you have? And they said none. That was incredible, because I've been to sort of 3 or 4 big major cities in China. I mean, I was privileged to see the major cities rather than poverty-stricken areas. And I did inquire about these poverty-stricken areas. And these guys, you know, who were top class engineers and things like that, whom I was dealing with, they did hint that in the Western China, you know, that things are not as rosy as they were on the coastal Shanghai and the Beijing areas, and you know, the Hong Kong side of areas. So and I did actually experience people on railway stations, you know, in sleeping bags and things like that. And I also experienced you know, prostitution as well, you know, pimps coming up to you and wanting to tout business and all that. These are outside 5-star hotels, which I was staying in. But in spite of all that, comparing that to India, there is just no comparison. So China has gone leaps and bounds beyond India. In terms of animal farm, you know, whether proletarian dictatorship, you know, what, Kalpana, like I said, construction of socialist society is only but a few decades old. You know, the question is, and it is a reality that when one class tries to dominate another class, you know, when the bourgeoisie sees defeat in the face of the proletariat uprising, the bourgeoisie is going to counteract, is going to retaliate. There is no two ways about it, you know. We see that, you know, there is never an integral change between, you know, feudalism and bourgeoisie, between slavery and feudalism. There is never an integral change. There's always going to be retaliation from the losing or the outgoing mode of production against the incoming modes of production. And it is a struggle. It is a struggle. And the question really is, is that, you know, for me, the question really is, do I look at the bling and the glitter of Shanghai and the Beijings and the Shenzhens and all that? Do I say that that is better than what it is actually, when you look at what the exploitation nature it has succeeded on? For example, you know, people are struggling to pay their rents in in their flats when they live in Shanghai. You know, they are struggling to send any money back to their parents, you know, who are in the urban areas, and they have no means to survive. You know, they are struggling to even pay a visit to their parents once a year, you know, for 1 week. Their annual leave is absolutely ridiculous. You know, they're working 24/7, you know, and this is the experience I have of the top class, well, supposedly highly paid engineers in China. So you know, this is the contrast we have to see, you know. So no doubt China is now is a bling society, high-rise buildings and six-way, you know, roadways, bullet trains and what have you, but at the expense of what? You know? So, you know, who is suffering? Is there super exploitation, right? Now, it's better that the fear that was still in us.
I think.
So these are questions you have to answer. Was proletariat dictatorship, which actually exercise?
I think he has gone because I think his. Okay, Ravi, you want to ask something?
Thank you.
After
I had a question. I was just going to, well, I was to respond to Kalpana as well, the question that she raised about the difference between India and China. In many senses, they're very much still the same. Very similar. You know, China's obviously progressed economically, and it's a global superpower now. Technology has uplifted millions of people, hundreds of millions of people out of poverty. But when you look at some of the social issues that affect the mass Chinese, issues such as polyandry, because of the one-child policy, there's a massive imbalance. The genders, there's you know, less females than there are men, and in kind of rural China, you often find that one woman would be married to, you know, 3 brothers, and economically that's the way they survive. So the one-child policies had that issue, and that's an issue also in India. Well, caste system used to be in India, in China, you had the ancient caste system there as well, and it's manifested itself in a modern way now, which is known as the Chinese system of Hoku, where you basically have 2 distinct and unequal castes, right? And so, you know, in a summary, it's the codified economic inequality as well. So that remains in China as well, you know, and you scratch the surface, it's there. And also, I mean, so I've seen articles and news alerts about the reemergence of superstition in China, and you often get a ritual kind of, you know, press release from the Chinese Communist Party, its members not to believe in superstition and the rest of it. So a lot of Chinese are, you know, following traditional Chinese superstitious practices, burning red paper and all the rest of it. So again, in that sense, it's very similar to India as well. You know, so socially, there is a lot in common with India yet, but economically, they're worlds apart in that sense.
Yeah, Saif. Thank you, Ravi. That's good input. Thank you. Saif.
Thanks, Lake, for the presentation. Your presentation and the document that you sent around, there seems to be kind of division, a kind of a bijection between in the entire Chinese post-colonial Chinese history. That is, there is a pure period of Mao, and then there is a post-Mao period, which is a kind of an adulteration of the pure principles which Mao postulated or distilled. and so on. So a period where the prophet Mao was there, and people followed from his direct inspiration, whereas when he was gone, all sorts of problems creeped in, and so on and so forth. And then the document talks about social imperialism. So if we look at the history of Mao's period himself, we'll see that that the Communist Party, the Chinese Communist Party, what is called the Chinese Communist Party, but majoritarian Han Chinese Communist Party, was engaged in imperialist maneuvers or colonialist maneuvers from the very beginning. So if we look at how the Han Chinese occupied and sort of assimilated entire Inner Mongolia, because almost half of Mongolia, or East Turkestan, or Tibet later on, right? All of these now constitute as China. They call it autonomous parts and so on and so forth. But the original China, or the original Han China, was not even the 1/3 of the present China. And all of these occupations started during the period of Mao. So the principles of, if we are adhering to some sort of principle that colonialism or imperialism is morally wrong, then this moral wrong started during Mao's period himself. It's not that with the capitalist adulteration which came post Mao, these kind of vices started in the Chinese Communist Party. So there should be some sort of consistency of application of certain moral principles, whether this morality is acceptable to us or not. The other thing is that when we are talking about
they were already in China.
So, for example, if we look at Inner Mongolia, the data says that, I mean, this data can be disputed because, again, we have been talking about this, that the data, the verifiability of the data which is coming out of that region is very difficult. So the data that I have says that from 1950 to 1957, the Han Chinese, the Communist Party, moved around 500,000 Han Chinese into Inner Mongolia, and later on almost 2 million. Now the number seems to be minor, but if we look at Inner Mongolia was very sparsely, still is very sparsely populated. Same thing happened with Xinjiang, which is Turkestan, Tibet, and so on and so forth. So all sorts of policies of colonization have been implemented since the Maoist revolution in China, right? So this needs to be taken into account if we are looking for some sort of a golden era of Mao, which have been disrupted by this capitalist sort of the people who came after Mao. Other thing is that what is the criteria of progress that we are applying here? If the criteria of progress is lifting people out of poverty, great. What is that poverty, right? Starvation, great, sure. But is that the criteria that is being applied within China now, the criteria of progress? Or is the criteria is that more and more people should move into economic positions where they can, in symbols of middle-class wealth, middle-class prosperity, they can buy the latest iPhones and so on and so forth? Is that the real criteria that is being applied within Chinese society or on Chinese society and so on and so forth, right? Is that the criteria, or is this, we are talking about some other particular criteria? If we are talking about just lifting up people out of poverty, then Western societies have done this much better compared to Chinese, right? So why, if we are praising the Chinese Communist Party for doing this, then we should also praise the West, right? You should say, well, the West did very great. I mean, forget about colonizing half of the world or most of the world, plundering their resources, committing genocide, and so on and so forth. The Maoist Communist Party was doing pretty much similar things. They didn't have those many resources to commit it, but whatever resources they had, they applied those resources. Mao's own brother, real brother, younger brother, died in Xinjiang. What was he doing there? Obviously spreading revolution, right? But what kind of revolution was that? There was a rebellion at their hands where the East Uyghur people wanted to get out of the Chinese, Han Chinese occupation. And he was captured by a local, whatever, warlord and killed. So I think there are fundamental, I mean, we talk about dictatorship of proletariat and so on. So whose proletariat are we talking about? I don't know. We should problematize these kind of generalized terms. And therefore we are questioning these terms that Kalpana was saying that we should ask about the questions regarding the weakness of theoretical weakness, or at least question the, whatever those theories. We should, in general, we should talk about these things. We should question, we should take the data and we should question these golden eras, whatever these golden eras are. I'm problematizing the entire thing. So yeah, that's it.
Okay, Lek, can you wind up the discussion? Do you like?
I will try, but I think it's going to be very difficult considering the number of issues Saif has raised. I think we're not going to, if we don't have the basics of where we are arguing from, then we have a problem. And the basics, if we are disputing the basics, like what is proletarianism and what is bourgeoisie, then we have a problem. Then we have to have a different kind of a discussion, and it can't be done in this one. Because if you are, I accept that Marxism is the philosophy which Lenin and Mao Zedong took forward. And to me, that is the way forward in terms of bringing equality, liberty, and fraternity amongst the world population. So, I was of the view, I am of the view that Chairman Mao and his Communist Party did the best it could in order to establish equality and lifting people out of poverty, trying to eradicate exploitation of man by man. That was the essence, you know, to stop the exploitation of one man by another man. And this is what they try to do. Now, obviously the antithesis of the proletariat, the bourgeoisie, would not want that to happen, because if that happens, then their tools for exploitation and making billions and bucks and things like that disappear. So they are going to counteract. They are going to counteract, and you are going to get foreign bourgeois imperialist powers trying to do their damnedest best to A, to embargo you, right? B, try and install all sorts of counterinsurgencies, whether they're wherever they are in your peripheries or internally, where, you know, they're going to do that. Because at the end of the day, this is actually a class war. And if you look at the world from a class war perspective, then I think you have a different picture. But if you just look at it from the point of view of prosperity, well, you say, yeah, the Americans given prosperity, so what if the Chinese have given prosperity? But the fact of but there is a difference between the prosperity, not between the prosperity which Mao brought, right? And the difference between the prosperity which the current regime, the corporate regime of China brings, right? Because the current corporate regime of China, right, with the sophisticated technology, with the sophisticated weaponry, with the sophisticated road system and what have you, they are leaving behind untold misery of workers, right? Where people are resorting to prostitution, where people are actually resorting to killing their children because they can't afford to see them. This is in the urban areas. This is in the rural areas where they can't afford to see them starve. This is the situation that is also the other side of the current prosperous China, right? So it's a decision you have to make, and I think you know, our discussions will have to be tailored on what perspective do you see? Do you see the prosperity offered by the American imperialist system, the European imperialist system, as the preferred system, or do you see the prosperity offered by a controlled, working class controlled dictatorship as the prosperity that you prefer? These are the questions you have. You know, these are the choices you have, and then we can argue either way.
Okay, then thank you very much. We shall wind up this discussion. Let's plan for